And now we have rule number 4, and I would say that this one is the second most important one that I'd like you to master. This one is commas around interrupters. Some of the handbooks will call them non-essential elements, but it's non-essential elements or interrupters. We've got more than one phrase to describe it. But an interrupter is a word, phrase, or clause inserted into a sentence to give more information about some element within the sentence. An interrupter, or non-essential element, is never essential to the structure of the sentence. In other words, if you took it out, the sentence would still make perfect sense. It doesn't mean that you don't want that to be part of the sentence, because it does add detail. It just means that grammatically, the sentence would still function if you took it out. So I have 2 examples for you. The dog, comma, tail wagging, comma, bounded towards its owner. So with this comma rule, you have to remember that there are 2 commas involved. And when people make a mistake with this one, they recognize that a comma should go there, but they're forgetting the second one. They're forgetting the number 2 comma. But let's look at the sentence. If you took out the words tail wagging and read the sentence, the dog bounded towards its owner, it still is an independent clause. It has the subject dog, the verb bounded, and it completes the thought with towards its owner. So tail wagging is nice to know, but the verb bounded makes it pretty clear that the dog's coming pretty happily. So it's a non-essential element or an interrupter interrupting the flow. So there's a comma or before and after it. Let's look at example number 2. The student, comma, disappointed by her grades, comma, withdrew from the course at midterm. Disappointed by her grades interrupts the flow of the sentence, but if you took it out, the sentence would still grammatically make sense. The student withdrew from the course at midterm. Nice to know why, but not necessary to the structure of the sentence. So this is a good time to pause and complete practice number 2 or number 4. And when you're finished, resume the video and we'll go over the answers. Practice number 4. Number 1. The interruption, brief as it was, distracted Heather and made it hard for her to focus on her work again. The interruption is brief as it was. You could take it out and the sentence would still work. So you put a comma after interruption and a comma after was. Number 2. Mr. Angelo, a friend of my family, runs the delicatessen on 3rd Street. A friend of my family is the interruption, and so there's a comma after Angelo and a comma after family. If we were in class, this is where I would interrupt and ask you if you know what a delicatessen is. There's a lot of students that at this point aren't able to identify what it is. So just as an aside, a delicatessen is the long word or the original word for the word deli. It is a German word, and it's what we would call it 100 years ago, but then we just shortened it to deli, and most people aren't aware of the original word. Number 3, Brianna, sighing heavily, opened her books to study. The interruption is sighing heavily, so the comma goes after Brianna and after heavily. Number 4, the banana apparently left by one of the children lay forgotten in the back seat until it was brown and shriveled. The interruption is apparently left by one of the children, so the comma goes after banana and after children. And finally, number 5, lava lamps, which first appeared in the 1970s, became popular again in the 1990s. And you will see that there's a comma after lamps and a comma after the 1970s. So, like I said, this one is probably the second most important rule, because often when students are doing this, they remember one comma, but they forget the other. So remember, if there's an interruption to the flow that adds a little extra information, maybe it should be in between 2 commas.